Hi, welcome to part 2 of Approach to Respiratory Distress in Newborn. In this part, we will read about approach to management. Specific management depends on the underlying condition. History, clinical examination, and necessary investigation helps establish the diagnosis. First, we will talk about the history. A detailed history is essential in assigning a cause of respiratory distress. Evolution of respiratory distress. The risk factors and the evolution of respiratory distress can give a clue to diagnosis. Okay, we will read about all this in the table 14.5 and 14.6. Now, coming to the investigations part. The common investigation performed on a neonate with a respiratory distress are provided below. The selection of tests depends on clinical condition, availability, and whether the particular test would be helpful in the given scenario. We will read about the test. Before that, let's read about these tables that we have discussed. This is the table 14.5, in which relevant history in a neonate with a respiratory distress, what we are supposed to ask. So, in the antenatal history, what are we supposed to ask? Maternal history of diabetes mellitus. Then there is high risk of transient tachypnea of newborn and respiratory distress syndrome. If there was any pregnancy-induced hypertension or intrauterine growth retardation, this can cause polycythemia and hypoglycemia, and history of asthma that can also cause transient tachypnea of newborn, fever or any urinary infections in the preceding 2 weeks of the delivery, which can lead to neonatal early onset sepsis. So we should ask whether the mother had a fever or any UTI before 2 weeks of the delivery. We should ask about any substance abuse like narcotic drug withdrawal, history of polyhydramnios and oligohydramnios, as polyhydramnios is associated with tracheoesophageal fistula and neuromuscular disorders, and oligohydramnios is associated with the pulmonary hypoplasia. RH isoimmunization history needs to be taken in case of hydrops fetalis, antenatal steroids that is non-recipient predisposes to respiratory distress syndrome, previous sibling with the respiratory distress, there is surfactant and the protein B deficiency. Fine. Antenatal steroids, non-recipient predisposes to RDS, and previous sibling with a respiratory distress, surfactant protein B deficiency. Okay, and in the intranatal history, what we are supposed to ask: prolonged rupture of membranes, intrapartum fever, or chorioamnionitis. They can cause sepsis, meconium stain, like a. Okay, this can cause sepsis. This was the first point. The second point is if there is any history of MSL, then that could cause meconium aspiration syndrome or asphyxia. In case of fetal distress, asphyxia can occur. C-section without labor, transient tachypnea of newborn, respiratory distress syndrome, and the PPHN. Breech presentation, instrumental delivery can lead to trauma, herbs with the phrenic nerve palsy. In the postnatal one, onset of respiratory distress, onset at birth. This can lead to transient tachypnea of newborn, respiratory distress syndrome, pneumothorax or air leak, meconium aspiration syndrome, and the congenital malformations. Onset hours or days later, that can lead to congenital heart disease that might have occurred in case of congenital heart disease or sepsis. Fine. So in postnatal, what we were able to do is, on the basis of onset of respiratory distress, no, we can identify few of the causes. Like onset, if the onset of respiratory distress is at birth, then we can suspect transient tachypnea of newborn, respiratory distress syndrome, pneumothorax or air leak, meconium aspiration syndrome, and congenital malformations. And if the onset of respiratory distress is hours or days later, then we can suspect congenital heart disease and sepsis. Fine. Moving ahead to the table in which risk factors and evolution of respiratory distress in common neonatal condition. Fine. So if the neonate has respiratory distress syndrome, what will happen? Infants with the respiratory distress syndrome are preterm and typically present within the first several hours of life. Okay, within the first few hours of the life, this infants with the respiratory distress syndrome will present, and mostly they would be preterm, mostly immediately after the delivery. The distress is marked by tachypnea, nasal flaring, grunting, and subcostal and intercostal retractions. Okay, this all will be seen in the preterm infant with RDS, tachypnea, nasal flaring, grunting, the subcostal and the intercostal retraction. In infants who do not receive exogenous surfactant therapy, the endogenous surfactant synthesis results in recovery of the distress in the first week. So within 1 week, the distress will be recovered because there will be endogenous surfactant synthesis. Fine. So this was the first risk factor, and how will the respiratory distress evolve? In the second condition, it is transient tachypnea of newborn. So risk factors for this include cesarean section without labor, precipitous delivery, late preterm or early term births, and gestational diabetes. Gestational diabetes is also a risk factor for transient tachypnea of newborn. Respiratory distress has onset immediately after birth, but it is mild and self-limited with resolution in 72 hours. So that is important. If a respiratory distress is resolving within 72 hours, then it's most likely transient tachypnea of newborn. Important to remember is that its onset is also immediately after birth, just like respiratory distress syndrome, but it is mild and self-limited. Okay. Fine. Second condition that we're gonna read about is pneumonia. Oh, it's the third one. So it is a risk factor for early onset sepsis, including the group B streptococcus carriage in a pregnant mother, chorioamnionitis, maternal fever, prolonged rupture of membranes, premature rupture of membranes, and spontaneous onset of preterm labor. Neonatal pneumonia presents as a generalized sepsis illness. Onset can be delayed by a few hours and is generally indistinguishable from the RDS. Fine. So this is very important to remember that who are at risk for pneumonia or at risk for early onset sepsis. Mothers who are this carriage of group B streptococcus, mothers who had chorioamnionitis, maternal fever of history is present, and there is prolonged rupture of membranes and preterm premature rupture of membrane and spontaneous onset of preterm labor. They are all at risk of early onset sepsis. Neonatal pneumonia presents as generalized sepsis illness. This is very important for us to remember that this neonatal pneumonia presents as what generalized sepsis illness. Onset can be delayed by a few hours and is generally indistinguishable from the RDS. It's not very easy to distinguish it from the RDS. Okay. Now coming to the meconium aspiration. Risk factors include the meconium stained amniotic fluid, post-term gestation, fetal distress. This all will be seen in meconium aspiration. Okay, if the what are the risk factors again? Meconium stain amniotic fluid if present, post-term gestation, because in post-term babies are most likely to pass meconium in utero, right? So that can cause meconium aspiration and ultimately leading to meconium aspiration syndrome. Fetal distress will be seen, or there will be perinatal depression. Onset is at the birth with progressive worsening. Okay. Pulmonary hypoplasia. Risk factors include, what are the risk factors for pulmonary hypoplasia? It's severe oligohydramnios, renal dysplasia or agenesis, lower urinary tract obstruction, premature rupture of the membranes in the early gestation, diaphragmatic hernia, neuromuscular disorder. Respiratory distress has onset at the birth and is severe. In case of pulmonary hypoplasia also, the respiratory distress onset is at the birth and is severe. And what were the risk factors for it? This is very important to remember that severe oligohydramnios is a very important risk factor for pulmonary hypoplasia. Others include renal dysplasia or agenesis, lower UTI, lower urinary tract obstruction, not infection, it's obstruction, premature rupture of membranes in the early gestation, and diaphragmatic hernia. Because what happens in diaphragmatic hernia, through a defect in the diaphragm, this intestines and out of stomach and all, they come upwards in the thoracic cavity, giving very less space to the lungs, causing pulmonary hypoplasia. Okay, and also in case of neuromuscular disorder. So we have read about these two tables, and let's continue where we were. We were reading about the investigation. Let's start from here. The selection of the test depends on the clinical condition, availability, and whether a particular test would be helpful in the given scenario. For example, in a neonate with a suspected tension pneumothorax, it would be wise to do a trans elimination of the thorax and proceed with the treatment rather than wait for the chest x ray. We can do a gastric aspirate shake test. The gastric aspirate shake test is a simple bedside test to predict the risk of RDS. Why is it useful? It is a test to predict the risk of RDS. It is advantageous in areas where the radiography is unavailable. The test involves mixing zero point 0.5 ml of gastric aspirate obtained within 1 hour of the birth. What happens in it? Zero point 0.5 ml of the gastric aspirate obtained within 1 hour of the birth and an equal volume of 95% ethyl alcohol in a clean glass test tube. Cork test tube, shake it vigorously for 15 seconds and allow it to stand for 15 minutes before examining the liquid air interface for the stability of the bubbles. How long we should allow it to stand for 15 minutes. Fine, we are taking zero point 0.5 ml of the gastric aspirate and almost equal volume of the 95% ethyl alcohol in a test tube, in a cork test tube, then shake it vigorously for 15 seconds and allow it to stand for 15 minutes before examining the liquid air interface for the stability of the bubbles. The presence of an entire rim of bubbles is considered a positive test. The absence of bubbles is considered a negative test, and an incomplete rim of bubbles is an intermediate test. So the test is highly specific but has a sensitivity of only about 70%. In one study, no infant with a positive test developed RDS, while 66% of those with a negative test had RDS, respiratory distress syndrome. So a positive test is a good thing. That means the neonate won't have RDS. Okay. And when will be it called a positive test? When there is a presence of entire rim of bubbles. Fine, then it is positive test. Absence of bubbles is considered one second. Absence of bubbles is considered a negative test, and incomplete rim of the bubbles is an intermediate test. Fine, so this was about the gastric aspirate shake test. Second thing that we can do is a trans illumination. A fiber optic bright light source applied to the chest wall can be used promptly to identify the air leaks like pneumothorax and pneumomediastinum or pneumopericardium and pneumoperitoneum. So basically, we are just identifying the air leaks and severe pulmonary intestinal emphysema PIE, and in the emphysematous bullae may also trans-illuminate. The room must be dark while performing this test, and one must also differentiate the slight normal halo of the light around the probe from increased trans-illumination noted from the air collection. So what is written here is that a slight normal halo of light is normal around the probe. We should be able to differentiate it from the increased trans illumination which is noted from the air collection. When used in the small neonates, care must be exercised to avoid the skin burning from the light source. Fine. But the light source even can burn the skin, so we should take care and avoid it. Right, now starting with the third investigation, there is chest radiography. Radiography is the primary diagnostic tool for the respiratory distress in neonates. Fine. The commonly taken view is the anteroposterior, while the lateral and the cross-table view lateral views can be used to evaluate the air leaks, pleural effusion, and placement of the tubes or catheters. Okay. Now, fourth investigation is ultrasound. It is a point of care lung ultrasonography can be used to diagnose various pulmonary conditions like the respiratory distress syndrome, transient tachypnea of newborn, pleural and the pericardial effusions, detection of the pneumothorax, evaluation of the mediastinal and the thoracic masses, assess the position and the movement of the diaphragm as in uh, eventration and the diaphragmatic palsy, and confirm the position of the intravascular catheter. So all this that we just read can be done via the point of care lung ultrasonography. Okay. Fifth investigation is the fluoroscopy. Fluoroscopy is like a continuous X-ray study and can be used to evaluate the vascular, tracheal, and the esophageal anomalies, tracheoesophageal fistula, diaphragmatic activity, and swallowing studies. Sixth investigation that we are going to read about is the arterial blood gas analysis ABG. ABG provides a snapshot of the patient's respiratory condition and must always be interpreted in clinical context. Normal values are 7.35 to 7.45. These are the normal pH values. PaO2 should be between 15 to 50 to 70 mm of Hg. PCO2 should be between 35 to 45 mm of Hg. Bicarbonate 20 to 24 milliequivalents per liter, and base deficit of 3 to 5. These were all the normal values. A respiratory failure is present when there is hyperoxemia, that is partial pressure of O2 is less than 50. There is hypercarbia, that is partial pressure of CO2 is more than 60, and acidosis with a pH of less than 7.2. So this is a condition of respiratory failure. We should remember hyperoxia, hypercarbia, and acidosis. Hypoxemia may result from both the cardiac and respiratory causes. Hypercarbia is better indicator of respiratory failure, right? Because we know that CO2 is something that drives the respiratory, that drives the breathing, that drives the respiratory rate, right? So rising partial pressure of CO2, PaCO2 of more than 45 in the presence of falling pH denotes failure of gas exchange. Okay. The goal of ventilation is not to make the blood gas entirely normal, but to keep them within acceptable target ranges. Now let's read about the oxygenation indices. These indices give us an idea about the severity of respiratory illness and help institute the appropriate therapy and predict death and adverse respiratory outcomes. The three commonly used oxygenation indices are: first one is the alveolar arterial oxygen pressure difference. That is, A is the alveolar, small a is the arterial, and this is the pressure difference between oxygen pressure difference between these two. So this can be calculated using the formula: alveolar arterial pressure difference is equals to 713 into FiO2 minus PaCO2. This is a formula that if you want to calculate you should know, where 0.8 indicates respiratory quotient on a mixed diet and 713 is derived from 760 mm of Hg minus 47 mm of Hg, which is the atmospheric pressure at the sea level minus the alveolar water vapor pressure. In healthy infants, the this difference between the alveolar and the arterial oxygen difference is less than 20 in the room air. This is important. What is the normal difference? It is less than 20 in room air. In the face of hypoxia, normal this difference indicates alveolar hypoventilation or a low FiO2. Okay. A high difference between alveolar arterial oxygen pressure difference may result from ventilation perfusion mismatch or shunt. If one were to increase the FiO2 to 100% and observe an increase in the partial pressure of O2, then the VQ mismatch might be operating, while no change in the partial pressure of O2 means a shunt. Okay, and the normal difference between the alveolar and the arterial is highly dependent on the FiO2. For each 10% increase in the FiO2, the pressure difference between this alveolar and arterial value increases by 5 to 7 points. So the value should not be interpreted without the FiO2. The second three commonly used oxygenation indices. First, we read about the alveolar arterial oxygen pressure difference. The second is one is the arterial to alveolar oxygen tension ratio of AA. That is the AA ratio, right? The AA ratio should be close to 1 in a healthy infant. A ratio of less than 0.3 indicate disturbances in the oxygen transfer. Fine. So, what should be the normal arterial to alveolar oxygenation ratio? Should be close to 1 in a healthy infant, and a ratio of less than zero point 0.3 indicates disturbances in the oxygen transfer. The third indices is the oxygenation index, that is OI, which is equal to mean airway pressure into FiO2 upon partial pressure of O2 in mm of Hg into 100. So OI is a very sensitive indicator of the severity of respiratory illness, as it factors in the presence pressure cost of achieving oxygenation, namely the mean arterial pressure. It indicates the severity of hypoxemic respiratory failure in the neonates, and oxygen index of more than 15 indicates a ventilation perfusion mismatch. Okay, when it indicates a ventilation perfusion mismatch if the value is more than 15, and oxygenation index of more than 40 is associated with the poor prognosis with mortality approaching 80%. Infants with the hypoxic respiratory failure and an oxygenation index of more than 25 may benefit from the inhaled nitric oxide when the OI exceeds to 40 and ECMO therapy is indicated. Fine, infants, this is very important that infants who have a hypoxic respiratory failure and oxygenation index of more than 25 may benefit from inhaled nitric oxide, and when the OI exceeds 40, ECMO therapy is indicated. Limitations include the need for an indwelling arterial catheter for the frequent sampling. Oxygenation index provides only an intermittent measurement of the oxygenation status. Fine, so this was about the indices that we read in the oxygenation indices. So till now we have read about a lot of investigations. First investigation we started with the gastric aspirate shake, then the trans illumination, then the chest radiography, ultrasound, fluoroscopy, and the arterial blood gas analysis. And after that we read about the oxygenation index, in which we read three indices, and the last one is the other investigations. So sense sepsis screen, blood culture and the CSF examination as indicated. Monitor the blood sugars and the electrolytes. Consider the echocardiography to rule out the congenital heart disease and to evaluate the PPHN. Treatment of the respiratory conditions. So the management of the individual condition is discussed in the subsequent chapters. The basic principles of the treatment include: firstly, the basic thing is we have to provide supportive care, assess the temperature, airway, breathing, and circulation. That is TABC. Correct the hypothermia in airway, assess the airway for the presence of secretions, right, and suction the airway if needed, and place a shoulder roll. So these are just the basic thing. In breathing, assessment for the respiratory distress using an objective scoring system. We have Downey scoring system for the term and the Silverman and Anderson scoring system for the preterm. Check the SpO2 level, intubate if the respiratory distress is severe or infectus apneic, and circulation, assess the heart rate, blood pressure, and the urine output. Check the blood glucose level and initiate the intravenous fluids if the distress is severe. Fine. So this is what we have to do in TABC. After that, this was just the basic supportive care that we need to do. In the respiratory support, what we can do in the respiratory support provided to the infant depends upon the severity of respiratory distress, hemodynamic stability, the presence of spontaneous efforts, the underlying condition, and the presence of complications. The objective is to ensure adequate oxygenation and ventilation and thereby decrease the work of breathing. Okay, last point in the treatment thing is monitoring for management of the complications. So we need to monitor for worsening distress using the Silverman score. Watch for the hemodynamics instability. We need to find features of PPHN, acute kidney injury due to hypoxia, and complications due to mechanical ventilations, etc. So this was all about the management of respiratory distress in neonates. Thank you.